Hello and welcome to session 2 of the Generation to Generation course, where we're going to be looking at the story of Eli and Samuel. James White, the founding father of intergenerational faith formation theory, wrote in the 80s quite a bit about the nature of relationships and community in the Old Testament. And he pointed out that community, as we read it in the Old Testament, is very much built on the idea of covenant. Covenant with God, but also covenant with family and tribe and nation. He sees Psalm 145 as a keystone verse for understanding how we see intergenerational relationships. Psalm 145 verse 4 says this: "One generation commends your works to another. They tell of your mighty acts." Today we're going to be looking at an old man, Eli, and a young man, Samuel, and learn a little bit about how they learnt from each other. A number of years ago, when my wife and I were in Nepal, we were walking out of our village where we lived, and we met an old man. I tried to say hello in my best Nepali, and to which he replied, sorry, I don't speak English. So I tried again because I was speaking Nepali, and he said, "Oh no, sorry, I don't speak English." Until my wife had a chat. He said, "Oh, good, you speak Nepali." And eventually we found out that he was on what they called in Nepal his forest years. He was older, he'd handed over responsibilities to his family to look after the farm, and he was travelling around various places, in a sense enjoying his retirement. Eli should have been in that sort of state, having handed over his responsibilities as high priest to his two sons. But his two sons were not good, and they displeased the Lord with their behaviour and their attitude. And so Eli continued to be the high priest in the temple. Hannah should have been enjoying motherhood. But Hannah didn't have any children, and so each year she'd come to the temple and pray that God will bless her with children. She got so upset one year that when Eli saw her and saw her crying, he thought her drunk, but she explained the situation and said she was coming to ask God to bless her with children. And Eli prayed for her and prayed that she'd go in peace. And God heard her prayer, and she brought her new son, Samuel, back to the temple. As a way of saying thank you to God. And so Samuel joined Eli ministering in the temple. The story of Samuel and Eli is a really good example of the power of mentoring, when someone of greater experience helps someone of less experience to learn something. The Soviet psychologist Lev Vygotsky wrote about how this can be understood. He said that there are some things that we can't do without the help of others. He called this the zone of proximal development, which basically meant that you can't quite get to a level of competence or doing something without someone helping you. And that's what Samuel found Eli helped him with. The best example of this is when God called out to Samuel in the night. Samuel was sleeping in the temple and Eli was nearby. And God called out to Samuel. But Samuel thought it was Eli, and so he rushed over to see him. And Eli, awoken from his sleep, said, No, it wasn't me, go back to bed. And it happened again, and God called to Samuel. And so he went off again to Eli, and Eli said, No, it wasn't me, go back to bed. A third time God called to Samuel, and by then Eli had understood. When Samuel came to wake him, he said to him, Go and say, I am listening, Lord, for it's God who's speaking. And that's what happened, and God spoke to Samuel that night. He had a message for him about Eli and his sons. This is a good example of how we can mentor and be mentored, how those of greater experience can help us. But there's also a point to remember here, that how people of less experience can also help those of greater experience. Indeed, Samuel in this case helps Eli to hear what God is saying. Even though Eli was the high priest, it was through Samuel that God spoke. I know in my church a number of years ago, we encouraged the young people in youth groups to come and lead a morning service. And after lots of support and helping them, they put together a service with worship and with Bible readings and with a sermon split between three of them. The church really enjoyed it. And the one comment that really stuck with me from that time was they said they're amazed at the spiritual depth of those young people. As you look at this session today, I'd encourage you to think if God is calling you to be a mentor to someone or be mentored by someone. Equally, he may be saying to you, if you are in that zone of proximal development and you've got new things to learn, are there people around you who might be able to help you on that journey of faith? I really hope that you enjoy the session today.